Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Cam and Crank, where today we dive into a story that blends engineering triumph, cultural impact, and decades of reinvention. The saga of the Honda CB750 and how it transformed from a production motorcycle into a canvas for some of the most creative custom builds the world has ever seen. This isn't just the tale of a bike. It's the tale of how riders, builders, and entire communities used a machine to express identity, rebellion, artistry, and freedom. When Honda unveiled the CB750 in 1969, the motorcycle landscape shifted overnight. It was the first mass-produced machine with 4 cylinders, overhead camshafts, electric start, and front disc brakes offered at a price the average rider could afford. Suddenly, the world's motorcycling capitals, from London to Los Angeles, had a new benchmark for speed, reliability, and style. Yet as revolutionary as the showroom model was, its real power emerged when riders began asking a simple question. What could the CB750 become if you pushed it further? That curiosity lit the fuse for a movement. Over the decades, thousands of builders stripped down CB750s into raw cafe racers, stretched them into radical choppers, rebuilt them as sleek street trackers, and sculpted them into machines that looked more like rolling sculptures than production bikes. Each transformation wasn't just about looks. It was about bending the identity of a mass-market machine into something deeply personal. The CB750 became not just the world's first superbike, but the world's most reinterpreted superbike. And that, more than horsepower or quarter-mile times, explains its legendary status. Across this video, we'll explore 3 interwoven arcs. We'll start with how the CB750 burst onto the scene and became a platform that practically invited modification. We'll then move into the golden age of custom building, where the CB750 was chopped, tuned, and reimagined in countless ways, sometimes praised and sometimes scorned. Finally, we'll examine the lasting legacy, how CB750 customs continue to inspire modern builders, and why these machines now carry cultural weight far beyond their steel and rubber. By the end, you'll understand not only why the CB750 earned its place in motorcycling history, but also why its custom builds remain some of the most fascinating chapters in the story of 2 wheels. This is a journey through engineering, creativity, and the pursuit of individuality. So settle in as we uncover how a Japanese superbike became one of the greatest artistic mediums on the open road. When the Honda CB750 first arrived, it was more than a new motorcycle. It was a new category. Riders who had once looked at expensive British or Italian machines suddenly had access to performance that matched or beat those icons. And they could buy it from a local dealership without worrying about constant breakdowns. The CB750 was approachable and aspirational at the same time, which made it an instant hit with young riders across America and beyond. But the very success that made it ubiquitous also raised an unexpected question. If everyone had one, how could you make yours stand out? That question became the spark for its transformation into a custom icon, microstory. In a small garage in Southern California in the early 1970s, a rider stripped his nearly new CB750 down to its frame. He cut off the rear subframe, welded on a rigid tail section, and swapped the factory tank for a narrow peanut tank he'd scavenged from a swap meet. The bike no longer resembled a showroom Honda. It looked like a lean, stretched chopper ready for boulevard cruising. This was one of countless early experiments where owners decided that factory perfection wasn't enough. They wanted to make their bikes an extension of themselves. These transformations were less about erasing Honda's identity and more about blending it with a rising counterculture. Microstory. On the streets of London, the CB750 found a different path. Riders influenced by the cafe racer scene pulled off the stock handlebars, fitted clip-ons, rear sets, and long alloy tanks, and suddenly the Japanese superbike looked ready for high-speed dashes between cafes. These British riders saw the CB750 not just as a reliable machine, but as a blank slate that could rival European performance bikes while carrying their own visual signature. The fact that a Japanese bike had invaded the birthplace of the cafe racer only added intrigue, sparking debates among traditionalists and newcomers alike. Reflection bridge. The CB750 wasn't simply being ridden. It was being reimagined, and that reimagining said as much about the rider as the motorcycle itself. Context digest. Part of what made the CB750 so attractive to customizers was its mechanical openness. The inline-four engine, though groundbreaking in its accessibility, was relatively simple to maintain, and aftermarket suppliers quickly realized there was demand for tuning parts. Carbs could be swapped, exhaust rerouted, and the frame allowed enough room for creative geometry changes. Unlike some motorcycles that fought against modification, the CB750 almost invited it, a trait that widened the scope of possible transformations. Micro story. In New York City, a young mechanic who moonlighted as an artist built a CB750 that looked like a minimalist sculpture. He shaved down all unnecessary brackets, ran hidden wiring through the frame, and finished it in brushed metal with only a thin leather pad for a seat. It wasn't practical, but practicality wasn't the point. The bike became an underground legend, displayed in galleries before it ever turned a wheel on the street. This kind of build blurred the line between vehicle and artwork, showing that the CB750 could transcend categories altogether. Reflection bridge. Each of these approaches highlighted the same core truth. The CB750 had become more than a motorcycle. It was now a medium of personal expression. Context digest. The aftermarket boom of the late 1970s further accelerated this trend. Companies in the US, Europe, and Japan offered bolt-on kits ranging from big-bore pistons and high-compression heads to fiberglass bodywork that mimicked endurance racers. Riders who didn't weld or fabricate could still personalize their CB750s through catalogs, and that democratization of customization broadened the bike's reach. It wasn't just expert builders shaping the CB750's destiny, it was everyday enthusiasts in home garages. Micro story. In Tokyo, a group of young riders formed a collective devoted to transforming CB750s into aggressive street machines. They cut down the bikes, fitted loud 4-into-1 exhausts, and painted them in wild schemes that echoed both racing liveries and Japanese subculture aesthetics. Their builds became statements of youth rebellion, a way to stand apart in a country where conformity often reigned. Though their bikes drew mixed reactions, they influenced a wave of custom culture that stretched far beyond Japan's borders. Context digest. By the early 1980s, the CB750's ubiquity meant that customized versions began populating every corner of the motorcycle scene. Chopper shows in the US featured radical stretched CBs alongside Harleys. European meets saw cafe racer Hondas lined up with Nortons and Triumphs. Even in markets like Australia, stripped-down CB750s became staples of local clubs. The machine had become a passport into nearly every style of motorcycle customization, respected not for being untouched, but for its ability to transform. Micro story. A Midwestern rider took a different approach by building a CB750 into a sidecar rig for long-distance touring. He fabricated a streamlined chair with Art Deco influences, matching it to the lines of the modified Honda. The result was both functional and theatrical, drawing crowds wherever he parked. His project proved that customization didn't have to mean stripping away utility. It could also mean adding new forms of creativity to extend the bike's role in daily life. Reflection bridge. Whether stretched, slammed, polished, or rebuilt, the CB750 was proving that one motorcycle could embody countless identities. And that raised a larger cultural conversation about what motorcycling itself meant. And with each experiment, the CB750 edged closer to becoming more than just a canvas. It became the central pillar of an entire custom-building movement that would shape decades to come. That story deepens when we look at the next wave of builders who pushed the platform even further, often clashing with purists while rewriting the rules of what a motorcycle could represent. As the 1980s rolled forward, the Honda CB750 had firmly cemented itself as a reliable, high-performance motorcycle, but its role in the custom world was still evolving. What began with garage tinkerers and rebellious youths now attracted a new breed of builders who treated the bike not as a canvas for personal flair alone, but as a platform to push engineering and artistry in equal measure. This period became a turning point where custom CB750s were no longer dismissed as curiosities. They were taken seriously as legitimate statements of design, culture, and in some cases, motorsport ambition. The stakes had grown higher, and so had the creativity. Micro story. A builder in Los Angeles decided to prove that a CB750 could hold its own against exotic European superbikes. He tore down the engine, added high-compression pistons, and paired them with racing carbs and a lightweight exhaust. The frame was braced for stiffness, suspension upgraded with trick parts, and the whole bike wore minimalist racing bodywork. On track days, it startled onlookers by running lap times that embarrassed machines costing several times more. The build wasn't just about speed. It was about proving that the CB750 could transcend its mass-market roots. Context Digest. As custom builders pursued higher performance, attention grew between two camps. Purists who insisted that modifying a CB750 erased its historical significance, and progressives who believed the bike's true legacy was in reinvention. Motorcycle magazines of the era often ran features debating whether cutting up a CB750 was sacrilege or salvation. This tension gave the bike a dual identity, an untouchable classic and an endlessly mutable platform, and that duality only made it more compelling. Micro-story. In Paris, a designer trained in architecture applied his eye for proportion to a CB750 build. He emphasized symmetry and clean lines, blending brushed aluminum with sharp, geometric bodywork that seemed to float around the frame. The bike was exhibited in a design museum alongside furniture and sculpture, turning heads of visitors who had never set foot in a motorcycle show. This project underscored how the CB750 was no longer confined to garages or racetracks. It was crossing into cultural spaces typically reserved for fine art. Reflection bridge. The CB750 had become not only a tool for transportation, but a mirror reflecting each builder's ambition, whether that ambition leaned towards speed, art, or rebellion. Context Digest. The aftermarket industry took note of this expanded interest. Entire companies specialized in CB750 performance kits, frame modifications, and cosmetic upgrades. Custom shops sprang up in major cities offering turnkey builds for clients who wanted a one-off machine without swinging a wrench. What started as a grassroots movement had scaled into an industry where builders could earn reputations and livelihoods by shaping Honda's once standardized superbike into bespoke machines. Micro-story. In Australia, a coastal mechanic built what became known as the Surf CB. He designed a frame-mounted rack for a surfboard, stripped the bike to a rugged tracker style, and tuned the engine for low-end grunt to handle sandy beach roads. The machine embodied a lifestyle more than a style, combining freedom of the ocean with freedom of the road. This type of customization showed how the CB750 could integrate with culture at a local level, adapting itself to the rhythms of place and community. Reflection bridge. Each unique creation reinforced that the CB750 wasn't bound to a single aesthetic or purpose. Instead, it was a shapeshifter that expanded to meet the needs of its rider. Micro-story. In Berlin, a collective of young fabricators built a CB750 with a raw industrial look. Exposed welds, unpainted steel, and visible mechanical parts gave the bike an unfinished but powerful presence. They presented it at underground art shows where it sat alongside experimental sculptures and sound installations. For these builders, the CB750 wasn't about polish. It was about honesty, celebrating the mechanical core rather than hiding it. Their approach contrasted sharply with high-gloss customs, showing just how far interpretations could stretch. Context Digest. During this period, custom CB750s began influencing factory design itself. Manufacturers across the industry noticed the popularity of minimalist cafe aesthetics and aggressive chopper lines, borrowing cues for their production models. The feedback loop between grassroots builders and corporate engineers blurred the line between custom culture and mainstream design. The CB750, once a product of Honda's engineering labs, had become an inspiration for those same labs through the work of outsiders. Micro-story. In Chicago, a father and son team spent years handcrafting a CB750 into a tribute bike. They machined custom parts in their basement, stitched leather for the seat, and polished every surface until it gleamed. The project became less about the finished motorcycle and more about the bond forged during the process. When they finally rolled the bike into the sunlight, it represented family, tradition, and perseverance just as much as mechanical skill. This story revealed how deeply personal the act of customizing a CB750 could become. Reflection bridge. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the CB750 had proven itself capable of carrying any story a builder wished to tell. But that raised the question of what would happen as the bikes aged, became rarer, and gained value among collectors. The answer would shape its legacy into the modern era, where preservation and innovation would clash and ultimately merge into a new understanding of what it means to customize a legend. And that evolution brings us to the present-day impact of CB750 customs and why their influence still resonates on streets and in workshops around the world. In today's era, the Honda CB750 occupies a dual space as both an icon of preservation and a playground for experimentation. Decades after its launch, the bike has aged into a vintage classic, and yet it continues to inspire a global network of builders who see its lines, its engine, and its history as fertile ground for new visions. What's remarkable is not just that CB750 customs still exist, but that they thrive in a culture where motorcycles can be designed digitally and built with CNC precision. The bike's adaptability has given it a second life, one that bridges the gap between past and present, nostalgia and innovation. Microstory, a workshop in Portland, Oregon, became known for producing modern cafe racers built around old CB750 frames. They blended fuel-injected conversions with handmade aluminum tanks and LED lighting, creating machines that felt both timeless and futuristic. These builds weren't just throwbacks, they were reinterpretations that asked how a 1969 superbike could be reborn in the 21st century. Customers lined up not for speed records, but for the story embedded in each ride. A machine that carried history while embracing modern comfort. Context Digest. The rise of social media has amplified this resurgence. Builders who once shared their projects in local clubs now broadcast them worldwide, sparking trends across continents. A CB750 build in Brazil might inspire a builder in Sweden within days, and the global conversation keeps pushing innovation forward. This interconnectedness has cemented the CB750's place as more than a relic. It is a global language spoken through metal, paint, and imagination. Microstory. In Madrid, a collective of artists and mechanics collaborated on a CB750 that blurred boundaries even further. They fitted it with angular fairings inspired by modern architecture, embedded subtle LED strips that glowed at night, and finished it in matte white. The bike was unveiled at a design festival, where attendees debated whether it belonged on the road or in a gallery. That debate itself was proof of the CB750's continued power to provoke thought and emotion, even decades past its commercial prime. Reflection Bridge. What started as a mass-produced motorcycle had now become a vehicle for storytelling, connecting eras, communities, and disciplines far beyond the motorcycle world. Context Digest. The vintage market adds another layer of complexity. Pristine original CB750s fetch rising prices at auctions, making some hesitate to cut and weld them. This has led to a surge in restomod approaches, where builders preserve original frames and engines but update suspension, brakes, and electrics. The compromise honors the bike's history while still delivering the thrill of customization. In many ways, restomods represent the truce between purists and progressives, uniting respect for heritage with the desire for individuality. Microstory. In Vancouver, a young engineer built a CB750 as his thesis project. He 3D printed intake manifolds, integrated smartphone-based controls, and used lightweight composite panels to reduce weight. The bike looked radical, yet at its heart was the same air-cooled four-cylinder that had defined the model since 1969. His work symbolized the next generation. Builders who see no contradiction between honoring history and embracing cutting-edge technology. Reflection Bridge. These modern interpretations show that the CB750 is not frozen in time. It continues to evolve, absorbing each generation's vision while carrying forward its original spirit. Microstory. In Italy, a retired racer spent years creating a CB750 that honored his racing past. He hand-fabricated bodywork reminiscent of endurance racers, painted it in his old team colors, and tuned the engine for reliability rather than raw power. For him, the build wasn't about impressing crowds, but about reconnecting with the machine that had sparked his passion decades earlier. When he rode it through the countryside, the sound of the four cylinders brought back memories of youthful competition, proving that the CB750 could still connect past to present in deeply personal ways. Context Digest. The legacy of CB750 customs also lies in influence. Many younger riders discovering motorcycles today encounter them first through custom builds rather than stock photos from the 1970s. To them, the CB750 is not just the first superbike. It is the chameleon that became whatever its rider imagined. This perception ensures its survival in culture because its identity is not fixed in one era but fluid across many. Microstory. In Brooklyn, a female-led workshop has made headlines with CB750 builds that challenge traditional gender roles in motorcycling. Their machines feature bold color palettes, sculptural seat designs, and engineering upgrades aimed at accessibility and comfort. By combining technical precision with aesthetic daring, they've expanded the narrative of who builds and rides CB750s, ensuring that the legend continues to adapt to modern conversations around inclusivity and representation. Reflection Bridge. From underground garages to global showrooms, from surf culture to design museums, the CB750's journey as a custom platform has become one of the richest sagas in motorcycling. It is a story not only of machines, but of people, and how those people chose to bend steel, shape leather, and carve identity through their work. And as long as builders continue to see the CB750 not as a finished product, but as a beginning, its legacy will remain alive, rolling proof that motorcycles can be both tools of freedom and timeless works of art. The Honda CB750 began life as a revolutionary production motorcycle, but over the decades it became something far greater, a living canvas for creativity, engineering daring, and cultural expression. We've traced how it moved from showroom floors into garages where riders asked, "What if I made it mine?" We've followed its rise through the golden age of customization, where it was stretched into radical choppers, carved into cafe racers, tuned for racing, or reshaped into minimalist sculptures. And we've seen how in the modern era, the CB750 continues to inspire builders who balance preservation with reinvention, carrying forward its spirit into an age of global sharing and advanced technology. What this journey tells us is simple yet profound. A motorcycle doesn't have to remain frozen in the year it was born. The CB750 shows us that reinvention is not only possible but vital, that heritage and innovation can exist side by side, and that identity on two wheels is something every rider has the right to shape. Its enduring presence in workshops, on streets, and even in galleries proves that motorcycles are more than machines. They are vessels of memory, freedom, and imagination. For automotive enthusiasts, the CB750 custom story offers a reminder that what we ride is only part of the experience. How we interpret and shape those rides defines the culture itself. The CB750 just happened to be the perfect vessel, mass-produced yet endlessly personal, reliable yet ready for risk, iconic yet flexible. It is a paradox that became a legend, and that paradox ensures it will never fade. So whether you admire a factory-fresh Survivor, a raw chopper from the 1970s, or a futuristic Restamod built last year, you're looking at different faces of the same truth. The CB750 has always belonged to the riders who dare to reimagine it. And that's why its story will continue as long as there are hands willing to shape metal and hearts willing to dream on two wheels. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.